The relationship between console gaming and PC gaming is going to change in the 2020s, and as a PC gamer, I don't mind that one bit. This is MultimediaJay Radio Style for Monday, January 13th, 2020. Let's start the show.
257. MultimediaJay Radio Style.
I talk about the 2020s as a new decade because of personal ambition to do better than I did last decade and make some pretty serious changes to how I do things on here and how I do things in the offline world. But apparently I'm not the only one who's thinking along these lines. It looks like console gaming as we know it is going to change radically going into the new decade on both the Sony side and the Microsoft side. Nintendo, of course, is doing very well for themselves too, but in terms of the beefiest consoles that challenge PC gaming, and folks like myself who build our own systems and would rather buy upgrades than new systems every couple of years. One of the reasons why I'm not really a big fan of the whole PCMR thing is because I know that for most of the 2010s, PCMR was boosted up by weak consoles. Consoles did not continue trying to fight in the hardware scene, and they fell noticeably behind, leading to years of memes about PC gaming and stuff like that. But as I look at the technical specifications of what's been released so far as of January 2020 for the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, a hammed-up version of the publicity photo is our picture of the day. Ran it through Picasa, applied a couple of filters and things along those lines. I really think consoles are going to come out the door swinging this year. And this is probably going to set the tone for PC versus console gaming for the entire rest of the decade. No longer are we going to be dealing with anemic consoles that are at least cheaper and easier to set up. Last decade, I used to talk about how consoles only sell for two reasons, their price and their simplicity. But consoles have officially lost the war on price. I can tell you that right now. Monolith as an upgrade was about $500 for me. I imagine these consoles are probably going to be around the $500 mark. There's no way they're not. If the Xbox One X costs $400, then bringing in the Xbox Series X at anything even close to that, when it's supposed to be twice as powerful, is going to either look like selling the console at a huge loss, or it's going to annoy the heck out of everybody that bought a One X. So no pricing details have been released yet for the PS5 or the Series X, but I imagine they'll probably be floating closer to the $1,000 mark than ever before, especially when the Nintendo Switch sits comfortably at $300. It just wouldn't make any sense. The question is the general public ready for a more expensive gaming console that has longer staying power versus something like the original Xbox One and the original PlayStation 4? I think the answer is yes. I think that as PC gaming has been fleshed out and has no longer become niche, and as services like Steam and GOG and the Epic Games Store have turned PC gaming into a viable alternative to consoles, I really think that consoles in general are going to deviate from what they've previously done, especially when consoles are slowly approaching the same problem that graphics cards have in our day and age, and that is 1080p is a mature technology. It's like the DVD of resolutions to play at, but it still looks pretty decent if you sit close enough to the screen, as opposed to the old 720p, 480, etc. 4K is still something that requires a lot of power in order to handle at a decent graphics level. But if you're getting into PC gaming these days, it should not take a lot of money in order to be able to max out your 1080p experience on like a 1080p TV you have sitting around or something like that. There's also 1440p as well, but I'm running a 1080p television into the ground here that I've had since 2008. And what's interesting is, my television has a 5 millisecond response time. As TVs have gotten more elaborate and able to do more visual processing and smart TVs and stuff along those lines, what I've seen is that newer TVs nowadays actually are not as quick to draw the screen, even in gaming mode, as mine is in standard mode, because televisions got more complicated, and for a while they veered away in terms of screen latency from what gaming monitors can do, creating basically a market for gaming monitors for people that play faster paced games that redraw the screen a lot faster than a television ever could. I'm kind of surprised that my choice of this specific Samsung model has worked out so well over the years. Then again, when it first came out, it was a 5 millisecond display competing with 8 millisecond monitors, and gaming monitors were doing 4 or 2, depending on whether there was an interpolation chip to try and speed the screen up even more. So, of course, nowadays there are gaming monitors that'll make you an ace at first-person shooters that blow this TV out of the water, but I'm very surprised at the staying power this Samsung panel has had over the past decade plus. Now, let's get back to consoles and their price and the discussion about those sorts of things. High hardware, high-price consoles have traditionally not done well. And history is loaded with all kinds of examples of high-price, high-hardware consoles that didn't do very well. The Philips CDI, the 3DO, and much, much, much more recently, the PlayStation 3 when it first launched. But the thing to remember is that the idea of console generations has a lot to do with why any of these systems previously have failed. And what we have with, at least on the Xbox side, the Series X, and I'm hoping on the PlayStation side as well, with the PS5, is something that is less of a walled garden than before. One of the critiques of consoles that I used to have is that you basically had to get all new stuff all over again. All new games, all new hardware. You had to have another box hooked up to the TV, and controllers in particular have been a real killer. Nothing like going from one console to the next, and all that changes on the controller is they add an extra button. But you have to rebuy the darn controllers, sometimes to the tune of $50 a pop for today's wireless controllers. That's why I'm glad that Microsoft has already announced that the Xbox One and Series X controllers are going to be very similar and interchangeable, and the Series X controller is just going to add a streaming button for quick streaming and stuff, similar to what PlayStation 4 added. But PlayStation 4 had a radically different controller from the DualShock 3 to the DualShock 4. After the DualShocks 1, 2, and 3 kind of stayed very similar for quite some time. But the controller thing has been something that has bothered me for a very long time. I have some really nice controllers for prior hardware, and they've been proprietary to the hardware, and as good as they are, they can only be used with that hardware, and it stinks having to buy all these controllers over and over again when you know the old ones are perfectly fine. They're just proprietary. Which is why I was very glad when Microsoft decided to cozy up to PC gamers and make the Xbox One controllers Bluetooth compatible so that Xbox controllers work with PCs as well. And this is the big thing that I like about Xbox as a platform, and also the rumors about the Series X is that it may even contain a Windows 10 mode to allow it to play PC games and or function as a regular computer. How far that goes, though, is a giant question mark. I'm not so sure Microsoft would want to cannibalize Windows licenses on PCs with Xboxes, so there is a little bit of a business issue there. But aside from that, though, look at this thing. It's a computer. It's a tower. It's got a big fan in the top to blow out all the heat. Spencer even confirmed in an interview that this is going to have a big cooling fan to cool everything at once and basically blow all the heat out the top or the side if you run it horizontally. And people have been joking about this thing being a computer for a while, but fortunately, Microsoft's PR folks put a controller in there for perspective, so if you realize, yeah, that's roughly 1x3 Xbox One controllers in dimensions, you can find out very quickly that the Series X is actually going to be about the size of a small bookshelf speaker. If you have a bookshelf speaker with a 5 1/4 woofer, like I use for my satellites in my system, one of those is roughly what an Xbox Series X is going to be when standing up. So it's not totally a computer tower. It does get me concerned, though, that maybe there'd be a repeat of what happened with the Xbox 360 if the engineering wasn't as up to snuff as Microsoft's designers think it is. So yeah, you have one fan, which bothers me because how easy is it to replace if the bearings start going and your fan spins slower and eventually seizes, like I've seen on some computers over the years. not good to have the one and only cooling fan as the one reason why your system isn't getting cooled via passive cooling and heat pipes or whatever, because it's the only fan in the system because, oh, we want the system to be quiet. One of the problems with the 360 that led to the infamous Red Ring of Death was that the original 360 was just cramming too much power based on the technology at the time into a box that was too small. Something that could smoke a lot of gaming PCs out there right now, doing 4K and 1080-60 without batting an eye in something the size of a bookshelf speaker concerns me as well. If Microsoft can pull this off, then great. I would love to see these things basically give a lot of people an easy in to decent gaming, especially when we know that both consoles are basically upgrades. They're revolutionary rather than evolutionary, and it is technically a new kind of console. But this does basically represent an upgrade because the backward compatibility with both the Series X and the PlayStation 5 are already confirmed to be with what was there before. So Xbox One working on Series X, as well as PlayStation 4 titles working on PlayStation 5. So this kind of eliminates a lot of the walled garden that has caused a lot of more expensive consoles to turn into money-burning tech toys in years gone by. Like when you bought a PlayStation 3, for example, in the beginning of the PlayStation 3's life cycle, and it was a big jump in technology, and it was very expensive, but there were barely any games out for it. These two consoles so far seem like upgrades for the new decade, and because of this backward compatibility and whatnot, it'll be nice to see that the walled garden effect isn't as big on the consoles as it used to be, because on PC, you have a lot less of a walled garden. The most you can run into with playing old games on PC is you might run into compatibility issues with prior versions of DirectX, or the jump from 32-bit to 64-bit Windows or something like that, or whether or not there's emulation available like DOSBox for playing old DOS games. And the fun part is that if you buy a game on GOG, for example, that's a DOS game, you'll often get a custom-tuned copy of DOSBox with the old game that you purchase to ensure that it runs on modern hardware. So the folks at GOG know how this game is played when it comes to selling old games to folks playing it on today's hardware by including all these copies of DOSBox custom-tuned to run the game on the various copies of these games that they sell digitally. And this is where consoles are catching up. And this is why I want backward compatibility to be gigantic on both of these consoles. We know that Microsoft really dove into backwards compatibility on the Xbox One, allowing for playing Xbox 360 games and original Xbox games. But what I'd really like to see is both the Series X and the PlayStation 5 essentially be the one box you have to have in your living room for both of those ecosystems. So on the PlayStation 5, as much as there's somebody on Twitter, it's either wishful thinking or viral marketing, hopefully viral marketing, but there's this unofficial PlayStation account on Twitter that talked about don't throw out any of your previous generation PlayStation games. Folks are treating it like it's official, but unfortunately there is an official PlayStation Twitter that you can keep an eye on for announcements like that. But if this happens to be some kind of drum-up hype via viral marketing type thing and not just some PlayStation fans' wishful thinking, I would love to see PlayStation 5 be the one and only PlayStation I have to have in my living room to play anything from the 25 years of PlayStation history. Same with the Series X. I want the Series X to be the only Xbox that I need to even bother with. And I'd like for this to continue with future releases as well. Because in the case of the walled gardens of years gone by, particularly since cartridge gaming became a thing of the past, and many of these older consoles have been using some variant of the CD for the past couple of decades. The Switch, of course, got away from this, but that's another discussion entirely. But in terms of the walled gardens of years gone by that we call console gaming, a lot of the older ones that were more separate from their successors and predecessors have been gone long enough that technology has to have advanced to the point where software emulation can emulate something like the Emotion Engine on a PlayStation 2 without batting an eye. The PS3 was able to play PS1 games. It was PS2 that was the sticking point for backward compatibility with that machine. And so, with how far back we're going, even the cell processor, I'll bet, there's got to be some way to bridge this gap so you don't have to have a PS3 and a PS5. That would be awesome, because that would basically help with a lot of the console issues related to having to have all this hardware around and continue to support all this hardware. And in some cases, it just gets more and more clunky to do so as the years go by. The big concern that people used to have with regards to all these CD consoles is, what if the drive belt breaks or the laser diode gives out and the thing stops reading discs? Then what? There's more moving parts and there's more chance for mechanical failure with a CD console than with the cartridge consoles of the distant past here. So because of that, people were always wondering about the longevity of things like old Xboxes and old PlayStations. In the case of PS2, I can go out and buy a lot of PS2 games in secondhand stores for like $1, $2, dirt cheap. But then I have to fiddle with component cables, I have to go to pre-HDMI unless I have a converter box, and then there's a key combination that you have to press when turning on the PS2 to even enable component mode in the first place. I'd rather not do that. HDMI's been around long enough that there should be some HDMI box that I can use to play these games when I come across them. If I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that from the PS2 days, I never got to play it, let's check it out. Anywhere you can buy a disc-based game, why not? So it's just a matter of not having to worry about whether the laser might die in your old PS2 or, oh, I need HDMI for everything except these pre-HDMI consoles and things along those lines. That's the kind of thing that has gone away as things have become more standardized. From PS3 onwards, we're talking HDMI, and certain SKUs of the Xbox 360 onwards, we're talking HDMI. And this standardization has led to some budget gamer folks out there talking about, oh yeah, you want to get into gaming really cheap, just go find an old Xbox 360. You can HDMI it into your television, and there are lots of Xbox 360 games secondhand still floating around out there that are dirt cheap. They're not going to look anything like what's out there nowadays, but they can still be entertaining. I imagine PS3 is probably in the same boat. I mean, I still have a PS3 that largely serves as a Blu-ray player these days, but there are some games that were only released on PS3, such as some JRPGs from that time period. Nowadays, you'll see more multi-plat releases where some even niche type things to a certain part of the world, like JRPGs and whatnot, will actually end up on PC as well, if they're recent enough to be converted. But there are some games like Eternal Sonata and stuff from the PlayStation 3 that I remember reading all these great reviews about back in the day that I've just never gotten around to, that are still only available on PS3. It'd be cool if my PS5, if I got one, could be the reason why I didn't have to hold on to the old dusty PS3 anymore. But you see what's going on here? Last go around with the last generation of gaming consoles, they were pretty anemic. They were not really much of a jump, and some people were outright making fun of them. Like the Xbox One versus the PS4, and neither of these consoles were able to do 1080-60 reliably. It took until the PS4 Pro with boost mode and the Xbox One X before finally consoles could do what PCs had been doing for years. And even if consoles become a lateral alternative to PCs, PCs will still have advantages for people that want to be more technically minded, want to upgrade stuff, and want to be able to troubleshoot their systems themselves instead of having to ship the thing off somewhere in order to get fixed and have it gone for days or weeks if something were to break on it and the console were to stop working. But we could talk about that in some other kind of discussion. The bottom line is, I'm actually curious about console gaming. I'm curious about buying consoles, and I'm curious about how much is Xbox going to cozy up to PC gaming with the Series X next go round. I mean, dual release to where if I ever bought an Xbox, I'd have Forza automatically on it because I already have it on PC, and vice versa. That was cool. Being able to be a PC gamer using console controllers, that was cool as well. I use Xbox One controllers for everything. I still have some 360 controllers around, but I've struggled to find a use for them because the Xbox One controllers just hook right up to Bluetooth and work. This intermingling between Xbox and Windows 10 has been really fun to work with, and Forza Horizon 4 with its performance update patches and stuff like that now runs on Monolith with a GTX 1060 and an i7 6700K, not even overclocked, mind you, just with the factory clocks. Forza Horizon 4 looks nice and is 1080-60 without batting an eye. It doesn't even use the whole GPU in order to do that kind of stuff. That's why I was playing with everything manually maxed out to see exactly how close I was to Forza Horizon 4 being just a bump on a log to this system. So I'm sure the brass behind these upcoming consoles would be glad to hear a diehard PC gamer like myself actually expressing interest in the upcoming round of consoles. But that would be, of course, because consoles are going to become more like PCs anyways, eliminate a lot of the issues. Then it's a matter of, what platform do I want to play what on? And of course, exclusives and other things that you can only find in certain ecosystems like PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo. But I was never a fan of PCMR. And one of the predictions that I'm going to make is that in the 2020s, PCMR is going to get dethroned, not because consoles are better, but because the console manufacturers have woken up and realized the hardware strategy of walled gardens every couple of years and consoles trying to be cheaper than PCs and stuff, it just didn't work. So a lot of the best elements of PC gaming can now be brought into the console world, like standardized hardware, the ability to upgrade and things like that. And yeah, it'll send some of us PC gamers back to the drawing boards, but I'm not going to abandon this computer that does everything I need it to do and plays 1080-60 very easily on either high or ultra settings in most games that I have right now. Plus, it's highly power efficient for this new decade, where it looks like at least the PlayStation is focusing on power efficiency, probably the Series X as well. But that's something I've heard some of the console head cheeses talk about as well. But hey, what can I say? As much as PCMR might be getting knocked down a peg or two, it's basically consoles doing an about face because of PCs and console gamers being able to enjoy some of the stuff that PC gamers have been enjoying for years. And there's some things that have gone in the other direction too, like the controllers and things like that. But when all is said and done, the 2020s are going to be a very different decade for gaming than the 2010s. And I hope that some of this console catch-up stuff encourages better PC ports, and there's some kind of feedback loop where all of these platforms are all going to benefit from the consoles catching up to PCs in a lot of different areas. This is MultimediaJay Radio Style. Don't touch that dial.